you.
Today, a man arrested after targeting presidential candidate Donald Trump in a suspected assassination attempt in Florida.
The Secret Service did exactly what they should have done. They provided exactly what the protection should have been, and their agent did a fantastic job.
Senate showdown. The coalition and the Greens stall Labour's Help to Buy housing scheme. Multiple people killed, thousands evacuated and several missing in major floods wreaking havoc across Central and Eastern Europe. And Australian actress Elizabeth Debicki wins her first Emmy for her portrayal of Princess Diana in The Crown. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. A man has been arrested in Florida after a suspected assassination attempt on US presidential candidate Donald Trump. A Secret Service agent opened fire after spotting a man with a firearm hiding in shrubs surrounding Donald Trump's West Palm Beach golf course, approximately 400 metres away from where the former president was playing. The man fled by car but was apprehended nearby. Donald Trump is unharmed and says his resolve is only stronger after surviving another assassination attempt in Pennsylvania earlier this year. Our North America Bureau Chief Jade McMillan joins us live now from Washington. Jade, what is the latest?
Well, we've had some updates from local authorities in Florida. They say that it was early afternoon local time when Donald Trump was playing golf at his course in West Palm Beach in Florida. It's not far from his Mar-a-Lago residence. And a Secret Service agent had gone ahead of the former president when he spotted the barrel of a rifle poking through a fence. This was just several hundred metres from where Donald Trump was. This agent opened fire. A man who had been in the bushes there fled into a nearby vehicle, but a witness, we're told, was able to get down the details of that car, and so police were then able to pull over that vehicle and that man was arrested. We don't have any official information about the suspect at this point in time, but multiple American media outlets have named him as Ryan Wesley Ruth. They say that he is a 58-year-old man who had been living in Hawaii. But this investigation is still in its early stages and we haven't had anything confirmed at this stage about what charges he will be facing. Now, officers say when they got to this area where the suspect had been located, they found a number of items left behind, including an AK-47 style rifle, 2 backpacks and a camera. And the FBI has said at this stage that it's investigating what appears to have been a second attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Now, neither the former president nor anyone he was with were harmed in this incident, and he has put out a fundraising message to his supporters. He says that he is safe and well, that no one was hurt, and that he'll never stop fighting for them, echoing the language that he used in the immediate aftermath of that first attempt on his life in Pennsylvania a couple of months ago, when he got to his feet and uttered those words, "Fight, fight, fight."
As you say, Jay, this does come just 2 months after that earlier attempt on the former president's life.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a shocking moment with Donald Trump targeted in that way at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. He survived that assassination attempt. His ear was grazed and a man in the crowd was killed. One of his supporters was killed. And so that raised so many questions for the Secret Service in particular about how that could have happened, as a former president and a current presidential candidate, Donald Trump, Trump is given around-the-clock protection, but it became clear in the very early stages after that shooting in Pennsylvania that there had been serious security failures. How could a 20-year-old gunman have climbed up onto a roof near where that rally was taking place and fired at Donald Trump in this way? So that agency has come under very intense pressure. There have been congressional inquiries. The head of the Secret Service stepped down, and now we're told that the acting replacement at the top of the Secret Service is travelling to Florida as the agency deals with this latest incident. Now, Donald Trump's team has praised the actions of those agents on the ground, but again, big questions here as to the level of protection that Donald Trump had and what went wrong to the point where someone could have been so close to the former president. The local sheriff was asked some of these questions. Here's what he had to say.
Well, you got to understand the golf course is surrounded by shrubbery. So when somebody gets into the shrubbery, they're pretty much out of sight. All right. And at this level that he is at right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was, we would have had this entire golf course around it. Well, because he's not, the security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems possible.
And Jade, we've heard from the US president himself.
Yeah, Joe Biden has released a statement saying that he's been briefed on the situation and that he's relieved that Donald Trump is safe. He goes on to say in this statement that this is an active investigation as law enforcement gathers more details about what happened. He says there is no place for political violence or any violence ever in our country, and he's directed his team to ensure that the Secret Service has every resource, capability and protective measure necessary to ensure Donald Trump's continued safety. Donald Trump's new Democratic opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, has also posted a statement on social media. She says that violence has no place in America. And Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has also released a statement. He says that he's glad that the former president is safe, that he spoke to him shortly before this news became public, and in his words, he was amazingly in good spirits.
Thank you, Jade. Here, the federal government is staring down a political challenge on a key housing bill, calling on the Greens and Coalition to back its shared equity scheme in Parliament this week. It's also talking up the success of its Housing Australia Future Fund, with grants banned for social and affordable housing projects. Political reporter Tom Lowry joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Good afternoon, Tom. So nearly 14,000 new homes will be built through the Future Fund.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ros. The question is how quickly those homes might be built, given the construction delays we're seeing around the country. Just to recap on what the Housing Australia Future Fund is. About a year ago, there was a fair bit of political argy-bargy that led to this fund being set up. It's a $10 billion fund. That $10 billion is invested, and the earnings are used to build social and affordable houses around Australia. There's a minimum spend of $500 million a year. That's part of a deal brokered with the Greens to get this fund established. And the first round of projects have essentially been announced, the first round of grants announced, and about 14,000 homes will be built. We should be able to give you a breakdown of exactly where that's going. There's 13,700 in total. About 4,200 are social housing, so that has its rent set at a level for those on low incomes, and about 9,500 are categorised as affordable housing, where rent is capped at 3/4 of the market rent in that area. But, of course, these homes have to actually be built. About 40% should start this financial year. The question is how quickly they're built after that point. Some in the sector say that, townhouses are fairly quickly built, but apartments could take much longer. The government is pointing to this as a bit of a success, I suppose, saying this is a clear policy that's been passed by the Parliament that is now delivering results.
And Tom, talk us through this fight over the Help to Buy scheme.
Yeah, Ros, this bill has a bit of a less certain future in the Parliament. It's being debated in the Senate now. This is what's called a shared equity scheme, and there are similar schemes in place in states and territories around the country. Essentially, under the scheme, the government would buy your home alongside you, buy a stake in your home, 30% for an established home or 40% for a new build. The idea being that under that scheme, the deposit required to buy that property would be much lower, and the mortgage repayments as well would be much lower, with the home buyer having the option to buy the government out down the track. It is, however, pretty strongly opposed by both the Coalition and the Greens. The Coalition argues the government simply has no place buying your home alongside you. That's not the solution to the housing problems that Australia faces. And the Greens argue this will only add to the demand side of the housing equation, simply putting more demand into the market and therefore pushing prices up. But the Housing Minister, Claire O'Neill, says she's hopeful the Parliament might see the merits of this scheme as it's debated in the Senate this week. Here's a bit of what she had to say.
Our government's trying to build, the Greens and the Liberals are trying to block, and we need them to stop doing it. We want nurses and early educators and paramedics to get into home ownership. This is going to be the only viable pathway for a lot of them, and I cannot believe that we've got political parties in this country that are going to stand in the path of these people who we owe so much getting into home ownership.
Now, the Greens insist they just don't see much to like about this scheme at all, but they are willing to negotiate if the government will bring certain other items to the table, talking specifically about negative gearing and capital gains tax, which have been Labor policies in the past, to tweak both of those, or rent caps, which is something the government has certainly quite firmly ruled out. Here's the Greens Senator David Shoebridge.
There is no credible modelling that says this will work. The Property Council, independent expert, says without significant amendment, it will just drive up house prices for the tiny fraction of houses that it's likely to deliver. A door is open and we're ready to negotiate.
The government's been pretty clear it's not going to negotiate about any of those items the Greens are offering, but they're not finding much of a welcome reception with the Coalition either. The Shadow Finance Minister, Jane Hume, insisting this morning that if the government is concerned about housing supply, it should be leaning on Labor state governments around the country to do something about it. Here's a bit of what she had to say.
These two bills that are before the Senate today aren't going to make a whit of difference to the number of people that own their own home. It isn't going to make housing more affordable. All that it will do is simply allow large corporates and indeed the government to own your home. Now, most homeowners want to own it outright, and that's not what these bills will do.
The government knows that these bills face a fairly certain future in the Senate, at least as things stand currently. Of course, things can change, but they seem pretty willing to have the conversation, have the fight even with the Coalition and the Greens this week on this particular issue.
Thanks, Tom. An elderly man has died after waiting 4 hours for an ambulance to reach his home in Melbourne's east. The state suffered a major paramedic shortage over the weekend. Reporter Danushi Dias has the details.
It's a question whether this tragedy could have been avoided. An elderly man left fighting for his life with no ambulance in sight. In the early hours of Sunday morning, there were cries for help from his home in Surrey Hills. Now, that's a suburb about 10 kilometres east of Melbourne CBD. His neighbours called for an ambulance at around 2 o'clock. But that help really didn't show up until around 6 o'clock in the morning. Non-emergency crew showed up, but at that point, the man sadly had passed away. Now, it's not known how he died, and police are preparing a coroner's report at the moment, so we will find out what actually happened. But this incident has come during a night of mass paramedic shortages. At one point, the state had a shortfall of 50 paramedic crews because many were unable to get to work due to seasonal illnesses. Now, the Victorian Ambulance Union says the real issue here is how these paramedics' workloads are being managed, because when paramedics are overworked, they're not finishing shifts on time or missing things like lunch breaks, then they do end up getting exhausted and becoming more susceptible to falling ill, and then that means they can't show up to work and get out to these really critical jobs. Now, the Victorian government says that it really can't predict when people are genuinely sick, and that the Victorian ambulance services will at times actually be stretched. However, it has reiterated reiterated that it will continue to invest in them so that they can continue to do their job, really, even under these stressful conditions.
Myanmar's military government says more than 110 people have been killed in floods triggered by Typhoon Yagi. It says at least 320,000 people have been displaced and more than 60 remain missing. State media has reported that 5 dams and more than 65,000 houses have been destroyed by the flooding. Typhoon Yagi, the strongest storm to hit Asia this year, has killed hundreds of people in Vietnam and in Thailand. Storm Boris is continuing to wreak havoc across Central and Eastern Europe, with the flooding described as the worst in nearly 3 decades. At least 6 people have died in Romania and 1 each in Austria and Poland. The low-pressure system unleashed a month's worth of rain in just 24 hours in some areas. Hundreds of people have been rescued across Romania, with 5,000 homes damaged in the east of the country.
It destroyed everything. I don't have anything left. The beds are filled with mud. The pillows are filled. I have nowhere to sleep. Nothing, nothing, nothing.
In Austria, the province surrounding Vienna has been declared a disaster area, with emergency services attending nearly 5,000 calls for help. The flooding trapped many residents inside their homes.
We have already discussed crisis and disaster management throughout the country, but Lower Austria deserves special attention here. The disaster is present on an unprecedented scale because it is so widespread.
Poland has evacuated 1,600 people in its southwest after a river along the border with the Czech Republic broke its banks. A local bridge collapsed and has been swept away by the floodwaters. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says his government is set to declare a state of natural disaster.
What awaits us next will be heavier, actually record-breaking rainfall in many places. If we only measured rainfall in totals, we could compare this year with the floods of 1997 and 2010. There are places where rainfall is greater than these critical years.
In the Czech Republic, the mountainous spa town of Jeseník remains totally cut off. 50,000 homes have been left without power and flood barriers have been erected in the capital, Prague. Authorities are warning more heavy rain is forecast for the European nations and have warned those in affected areas to remain alert. French police have confirmed that 8 people have died trying to cross the English Channel after their overloaded boat hit rocks in northern France. The latest incident comes after 12 people, including 6 children, died when a boat carrying dozens of migrants sank on its way to Britain earlier this month.
This is all that remains of the flimsy dinghy that took to the water in the early hours of this morning with the aim of getting to the UK. Most of those on board had no life jackets. Among the dead were people from Eritrea, Syria and Afghanistan. Several survivors were taken to hospital, including a 10-month-old baby with hypothermia.
The toll is devastating, as we mourn the loss of 8 lives. The vessel departed from the Zlak sector, near the town of Wimereux, with 59 people on board. It quickly ran into trouble and appears to have crashed on the rocks directly in front of where we are now.
The quayside was used to offer emergency treatment near to the spot from which the boat had departed with its human cargo. So far this year, at least 45 people have died out there attempting the crossing, many of them drowning, others crushed to death on dangerously overloaded boats. The French police insist they're doing what they can to stop the dinghies launching in the first place, but they point out they've got a huge stretch of coastline to try to patrol. Both Britain and France say they need to go after the smugglers who are cramming more and more people onto the boats.
Actually looking at the awful sort of rubber dinghies that people are coming across the channel with, many of them, of course, not able to make it in these contraptions, discussing how we go after those gangs in cooperation upstream with other European partners.
But the Shadow Home Secretary says it was a big mistake for the government to scrap the Conservatives' plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda.
We've seen fatalities of illegal channel crossings going up. We're seeing the numbers going up because the very first action of this Labour government was to scrap an international partnership which was deterring migrants. We know this because those migrants told us so.
But the recent deaths have not diminished the desire of many to reach the UK. Yesterday, 1,000 people attempted the crossing. More than 800 were brought to Dover after being picked up in the Channel. Bigger boats and bigger numbers mean there is real pressure on the government to stop the crossings and stop more loss of life at sea.
At least one person has been killed and more than 40 others injured in an attack on a multi-storey apartment building in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. A fire broke out after the complex was hit by what Ukrainian officials described as a Russian-guided bomb. Emergency services rushed to help survivors and treat victims, many of whom were trapped under rubble. Officials say the body of a 94-year-old woman was recovered from the 9th floor of the building. At least 42 people were injured in the blast, including 3 children.
My son, daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren, an ambulance took them away. My granddaughter has glass in her hand. She is 4 years old.
I was standing by the window and was hit in the back of the head by a flower pot.
Everything was blown out. I then ran through the rooms from the side of the hit. No glass, no frames, nothing left. I live on the 9th floor.
Russia hasn't commented on the strike but has repeatedly denied intentionally targeting civilians since it launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2.5 years ago. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the attack on a residential area underscores the need for the West to allow Kyiv to use Western-supplied long-range weapon systems to strike deeper into Russia.
Every such Russian strike, every instance of Russian terror like today's attacks on Kharkiv, on our Sumy and Donetsk regions, proves that long-range capabilities are necessary and the range must be sufficient. We are expecting corresponding decisions, especially from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy. Everyone whose resolve can help save lives.
There's been no new pledge from the UK or the US after President Joe Biden met with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the White House late last week. Vladimir Putin has warned NATO countries they would be fighting directly with Russia if they allow Ukraine to hit targets in Russian territory with Western-made long-range missiles. The British Foreign Secretary David Lammy says Ukraine's allies are still considering their options.
We announced more munitions, more artillery guns that they need, and of course we're discussing with allies a range of systems to ensure that we assist Ukraine in getting through the winter and repelling some of the worst action and aggression that we've seen from Putin in recent times.
In Moscow, dozens of Russian soldiers have returned to the capital after a prisoner exchange deal with Ukraine. They'd been captured in the Kursk region, where Kyiv launched its surprise incursion last month. The United Arab Emirates helped to broker the swap. The returning troops say they're delighted to be back.
I couldn't feel better. I'm so glad that we managed to get back home. When we were coming here, I felt it was the homeland.
My mother worried a lot. But I said everything would be fine, and everything is fine.
Some breaking news for you. A married couple from regional New South Wales has been found not guilty of murdering Amber Haig, a teenage mother who disappeared more than 2 decades ago. Robert and Anne Jeeves, both 64, were acquitted this morning following a lengthy trial in the Supreme Court. Ms Haig was a 19-year-old woman with an intellectual disability who lived with the couple at their farm near Young before she vanished in June 2002, leaving behind her 5-month-old son. Prosecutors accused the couple of killing Ms Haig as part of a plot to gain custody of her baby boy, while defence barristers argued there was no evidence behind the allegation. We'll speak to our reporter who's been following the trial next hour on the ABC News channel. Four Corners has been investigating the execution of one of Australia's most powerful organised criminals in Sydney last year and the role of police in preventing such deaths. In tonight's episode, reporter Mahmoud Faisal talks directly to contract killers and people involved in organised crime and investigates whether police have failed in their duty to protect the public. You can watch Four Corners tonight at 8:30 Eastern on ABC TV and on ABC iView. Nadia Daly is here now with all your finance news. Hi there, Nadia. So all eyes will be on the US Federal Reserve later this week.
Yeah, that's right. So the US's central bank is expected to cut interest rates for the first time in 4 years when it hands down its decision on Thursday morning Australian time. Markets are split on whether it will be a 25 or 50 basis point cut and how fast rates will come down over the months ahead. Of course, Australia's Reserve Bank will be watching developments there very closely ahead of its meeting, which is this time next week. And central banks in Japan and the UK will also meet later this week on interest rates, but they're both expected to keep them on hold for now.
Nadia, the price of gold is soaring. What's behind that?
Yeah, so basically the story we were just talking about. Gold is hovering near a fresh high today. It hit a record on Friday of $2,585 an ounce. Just a few minutes ago, it was about $2,582. So likely driven by the expectation of a US rate cut and the global easing cycle we've seen with major central banks right around the world the past few weeks. But let's take a look at what Australian markets are doing at the moment. The Australian market, the All Ordinaries and the ASX 200 are up 0.4% at the moment. And among some of the top movers on the ASX 200, we're seeing a few gold miners. Evolution Mining was up about 4%. Northern Star Resources up 2.2%, of course linked to the price of gold we were just talking about. And over to Asia, data from China over the weekend was subdued with industrial production and retail sales there slowing. Markets in China and Hong Kong are down this morning. Wall Street closed Friday on a high with the potential for a 0.5 percentage point rate cut driving shares up there. The S&P 500 was up 0.5%, the Dow and Nasdaq up 0.7%. And as we've been talking about, gold is up at the moment 0.15%. It's creeping up towards that high it reached on Friday. And to currencies, the Australian dollar is buying just over 67 US cents and just over 60 euro cents. And that's finance.
Thanks, Nadia. Celebrations are taking place across Papua New Guinea as the country marks 49 years of independence from Australia. PNG correspondent Marion Farr has more from Port Moresby.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of energy here. Festivities began over the weekend leading up to today, and everywhere you look, there are people dressed in their national colours. There's been singing and dancing, fireworks, markets. People have really turned out in force to celebrate their country, and it really gives you a sense of how proud PNG is as a nation and how much this Independence Day means to its citizens. Well, what you're seeing today, I think, is just a taste of what's to come. That 50-year milestone is already forefront of people's minds. There's a lot of planning already underway, so I think what we can expect is just more energy and the atmosphere to ramp up even more. It'll also be a time to reflect on PNG's history and how far the country has come in those 5 decades. And although people here are extremely proud of their country, they're also alive to the ongoing challenges that it faces, things like unemployment and access to services, women's rights and crime. These are things that the citizens of PNG want addressed. It'll also be a time to reflect on Australia's colonial legacy in Papua New Guinea and the ongoing relationship between the two countries. So although it'll be an extremely exciting time and one to watch out for, I think it'll also prompt some deep thought.
Marion Farr reporting. Australian Elizabeth Debicki has won her first Emmy for her portrayal of Princess Diana in The Crown.
Elizabeth Debicki.
The actor thanked the many people who worked on the show and helped transform her into Princess Diana.
Playing this part based on this unparalleled, incredible human being has been my great privilege. It has been a gift. Thank you so very much.
Fellow Australian Naomi Watts has been nominated for Best Lead Actress in a limited series category for her role in Feud Coote versus the Swans. Meanwhile, US comedy drama series The Bear is leading the award tally, snatching up 4 awards so far, including Best Lead Actor, Best Directing and 2 Best Supporting Actor awards in a comedy series. And Baby Reindeer has snared 2 gongs, taking out the awards for Best Writing and Best Supporting Actress for limited or anthology series or movie. This is ABC News, our top stories. The FBI is investigating a suspected assassination attempt on US presidential candidate Donald Trump at his Florida golf course. Secret Service agents opened fire at the gunman after spotting a rifle poking out of the bushes before he fled and was arrested later in a nearby town. Mr. Trump says he's safe and well and that the attempt has strengthened his resolve. The federal government is calling on the Greens to support its Help to Buy housing legislation, which will be debated in the Senate this week. The proposed shared equity scheme would see the government purchase up to 40% of a property with the home buyer. The government has also flagged some of the first homes under its Housing Australia Future Fund are close to being completed. Heavy rain is lashing parts of Central and Eastern Europe, forcing the evacuation of thousands of residents. 6 people have been killed in Romania and 1 each in Austria and Poland. In the Czech Republic, the mountainous spa town of Jeseník is totally cut off. Some countries are facing the worst flooding in almost 3 decades. And Australian actress Elizabeth Debicki has won an Emmy for her portrayal of Princess Diana in the TV series The Crown. Fellow Australian Naomi Watts is nominated for her performance in feud Coote versus the Swans. Shogun, The Bear and Baby Reindeer are expected to take home the most awards from today's event in Los Angeles. Let's get more now on the suspected assassination attempt on Donald Trump. The alleged gunman is taken into custody is Ryan Wesley Routh. US national security expert Karen Greenberg says the type of firearm the gunman was using will form an important part of the investigation.
We know that he's 58 years old. We know that he brought with him a lot of equipment, both protective equipment for himself and equipment that would enable him to shoot from quite a distance, including a weapon that is often categorized as a weapon of mass destruction, an AK-47, and we know that he's now in custody. And we know very little else that I think is confirmed or confirmable.
So just talking about the weapon for a second, this AK-47 style assault rifle, it's not a gun that's easy to get hold of, is it?
No, it isn't, and that's going to be one of the first things that they try to find out, if they can find out where it came from, how long he's had it, whether he got it because of some involvement with the military or some kind of military organization, or whether how he got it, and I think they'll be able to figure that out and find out, but it's going to take some time.
Also reported that Donald Trump was about 400, 500 metres away from the alleged shooter, as you said, when he was apprehended. It appears that the gunman was waiting for Mr. Trump to get closer, but given that the gun had a scope in it, a shot could have been taken from that distance and could have hit its mark.
Yes, and actually one of the things that's important about this incident is that the Secret Service and the local authorities were able to stop this before it happened and to track the man down and to get him. And so I think that's a very important thing. However, close, any distance that's in the proximity and shooting distance of the former president is too close. But yes, I think the takeaway here is that they did stop this before it happened. The question is, what does this really mean in terms of future plans for both the former president and Vice President Harris going forward in this election?
What does it mean for both candidates and in the style that they conduct their campaigning from now on, particularly, of course, for Donald Trump, who had to change his outdoor rallies, for example, after the first assassination attempt a couple of months ago?
Yeah, and you can't, candidates can pick and choose where they want to talk. You can't tell them, oh, you can't have any more outdoor rallies. I mean, it's hard for them to want to do that. And so the question is, what does this mean in terms of upping the security on the one hand? What does it mean in terms of maybe talking to the candidates about places they might be more careful or not careful? I mean, one thing that happened at this golf course was that the former president likes to have people around. He likes to have the golf course be open even when he is playing golf there. And so the question is, you know, what will happen going forward in terms of the Secret Service and local law enforcement trying to put some guidelines and constraints on both candidates as they go forward in these last weeks of the campaign season.
And Karen, a presidential candidate doesn't have the security resources that a president would. Is that a potential vulnerability for Donald Trump?
I think that after this incident, and I think that the remarks that President Biden made within this hour, I think, are very much is that they will up whatever security there is. Whatever it takes to keep both candidates safe is going to be a high priority now. The amount of violent rhetoric, the expectations of violence around this election, which they've been trying to tamp down, don't seem to have worked. And so I think the only solution will be to have as much security as is possible. And my guess is it will ramp up considerably in the wake of this incident.
And after the assassination attempt a couple of months ago, Karen, the head of the Secret Service, resigned. You're suggesting that the agency did everything it could in this circumstance?
I think this is very much sort of the reverse of what happened last time. There was good coordination. There was fast action. They knew what they were doing. They disrupted it before it happened. They took preventive action, and then they got the suspect in custody because the protocols that they had put in place were protocols that worked in this scenario. And so, yeah, I think this was an attempt at defense and prevention that's important for the American people and the candidates to see that there can be safety around them in these days.
Karen Greenberg, thank you.
Thank you.
Naval and air forces from China and Russia have completed the first stage of their joint military drills. China says the drills aim to deepen strategic cooperation with Russia and strengthen both countries' ability to respond to security threats. The exercises saw a joint maritime group conduct simulated missile attacks. It's reported the drills involved 90,000 military personnel and over 500 army vehicles, including submarines and aircrafts. The government says construction of the first homes approved as part of the Housing Australia Future Fund are close to being complete. It's detailed the first round of grants of the $10 billion initiative, which was established to increase housing affordability and supply. More than 13,700 social and affordable homes have now been approved. Of those, 4,220 will be social housing, where rent is set at a level affordable to those on low incomes. Another 9,522 will be affordable homes, capped at 3/4 of market rent. Overall, the government expects 40% of successful applicants to start construction this financial year. Under the plan, 40,000 new social and affordable homes will be built over 5 years. Housing Minister Claire O'Neill says the first round of homes will go to those most in need.
It means that thousands of Australian frontline workers, women and children fleeing domestic violence, older women who are at risk of homelessness will have safe and secure and affordable housing.
Meanwhile, the government is preparing for another housing showdown in the Senate over its Help to Buy scheme, which is being blocked by the opposition and the Greens. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says it's the solution to building more affordable housing in the country.
It's a simple scheme of shared equity to enable people to get into housing earlier than they would otherwise. This is about supporting home ownership in this country, and it's something that should frankly have sailed through.
However, Community Housing Industry Association CEO Wendy Hayhurst believes there are a range of ways to improve accessibility to home ownership for lower income households.
These bills on their own are not going to solve the housing crisis, but if they're got right, if we can get the amendments, particularly in the Build to Rent bill, then it could be adding to supply and providing more affordable housing as well. We reckon that if we get our amendments through on the Build to Rent, we could have 1,200 affordable housing tenancies over the next year to add to those that the government's funding through the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Highly pathogenic strains of bird flu are spreading around the world, with 3 separate variants detected in Australia. In rare cases, the virus has infected people, usually those working with farm animals, but now it's been found in someone who's had no contact with animals. With more, here's Dr. Norman Swan, co-host of Radio National's Health Report and the What's That Rash podcast.
What's happened in recent years is that it's mutated and is able to get into mammals, non-bird animals. And in the last year or so in the United States, it's been infecting dairy herds, over 200 dairy herds through the United States, most recently in California. And associated with this spread, and through the years, there have been cases where the bird flu has spread to humans. In years gone by, it's had a high mortality rate, up to 60%. There have been 14 cases of human bird flu associated with the recent outbreaks, 4 of which have been from direct contact with dairy-infected cows, probably through the raw milk, and 9 through contact with infected poultry. About 18.6 million poultry, individual birds have been, chickens mostly, have been infected in the United States. This one case in Missouri, where there's been no dairy herds reported with bird flu, although there have been poultry flocks, reports no contact with farm animals whatsoever. So we don't know where this person caught it from. They got diarrhea, vomiting, headache. They were unwell, but not seriously unwell, and they responded to anti-flu medications. And when they did the genome of the virus that this person had, it was very similar to the outbreak in dairy herds. So the question is, which is what people are worried about, is are we getting human-to-human spread of this virus? Now, there's no evidence of that in this case. However, a close contact of this person, a healthcare worker, did come down with flu-like symptoms but did not test positive to flu. So it's a mystery at the moment. But we just do need to be on the alert, particularly in Australia, because with migrating birds returning to Australia for spring and summer, then the risk is that they bring more pathogenic, more serious forms of this bird flu. We already have some bird flu in Australia, but the more serious forms into the country.
Let's get on to another topic then, cholera. New figures have been released. They show more people are dying from this disease. Why is that happening?
Poverty, lack of sanitation, warfare, social disruption. It's moved from Asia to Africa. Africa's not had a lot of cholera historically, and this disease is still around, affecting thousands of people each year. 2023, which is a year most recently reported, and was a big year for cholera, and 2024 doesn't look much better.
It's been called the 7th pandemic of cholera.
Yeah, the first pandemic. Yeah, the first pandemic. Well, the 7th pandemic probably started around 1960, 1961 in Indonesia, and has continued to circulate through the world, particularly where there are trouble spots and extreme poverty. And the first pandemics, the early ones, were in the 19th century, thought to have spread from the Bay of Bengal and transformed cities like London and Paris with really bad cholera outbreaks, where they built sewage systems. The Paris that we see today is almost directly the result of the cholera pandemics in the 19th century, where they had to knock down slums and put in clean water and effective sewage.
And a final topic then, weight loss drugs, Norman. It seems there are now some competitors to the very popular Ozempic drug.
Well, there are two dominant drugs in this market. One is called, the trade name is Wegovy, which is the same chemical as Ozempic, semaglutide. And then there's another one produced by Eli Lilly called Mounjaro. And until now, doctors have been prescribing these off-label. They're supposed to be for diabetes, but now in the last few weeks, the Therapeutic Goods Administration has approved them for weight loss. So no longer do doctors have to prescribe them off-label and taking that risk. The problem has been supply, and the drug companies tell us that supply is getting better. So I don't want to give an ad for these drugs, but there's a lot of demand for them. And as we've spoken about before on the show, they're not straightforward drugs necessarily, and some people can get quite major, significant side effects from them. We've still got to shift the weight of the population down through population measures like food supply and other things, not just rely on expensive drugs.
We've covered a lot of ground. Norman, thank you. More on the Health Report on RN and on the podcast, What's That Rash?
You're welcome.
A high school in New South Wales is to permanently adopt a 4-day face-to-face learning week after a successful trial of the programme. Chevalier College in the Southern Highlands said there's been a broadly positive response to the new schedule, which is designed to better prepare students for life beyond school. Greg Miller is the principal and he joins us now. Thank you so much for your time, Greg. So how will this work?
Well, how it has been working is on some Mondays, most Mondays throughout this year, we do learning differently on that day in two parts for Year 7, 8 and 9 students. They enjoy a day of face-to-face teaching mixed with what we call flipped learning, surface level learning set by the teacher to be more connected throughout the week. For Years 10 to 12 students, we do it for the whole day. On those days where they're not doing excursions or other full school events, which can often interrupt face-to-face teaching. So what we've found is that throughout this year, whilst we have reduced the number of timetabled face-to-face classes where teachers meet with students, there is far less disruption or interruption to that face-to-face teaching on Tuesday through to Friday because the disruptions have been moved to Monday, or they do flipped learning on a Monday. And what ends up resulting in that is that we can get some continuity of learning Tuesday through Friday, with the single biggest difference that impacts learning being that of the teacher teaching in a face-to-face environment.
So you say there's been a broadly positive response to the change. Does that come mainly from the students?
What there has been an acknowledgement that the steps that we've taken have increased our intent to develop self-regulated learners. So managing time, being organised for the day and for the week are two crucial and critical I suppose, qualities that post-school learning environments are looking for, including employers. And we can say that the students have acknowledged that. What we have seen also is some feedback from parents that are a bit concerned about their child either being bored or being left to their own devices for too long. What we would say is that the feedback from the students is that they are getting through the work, they're being productive, and that they are seeing this as an opportunity where they can exercise greater choice about what they're learning, who they're learning with, and being ready for the remainder of the week when they can get to what we call deeper learning activities.
Does this style, though, suit all kids, all students, though, Greg? There's a big variety in how students learn, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, and that's the same for our current face-to-face arrangement, is that the way that we deliver learning for one child is not necessarily always suitable for others as well. And there is no doubt that we have learnt that this is taking some students, especially our younger students, a little while, a little longer getting used to. We need to provide more support and scaffolds to support them making that adjustment. What I'd also say is that for those students that are known as diverse learning students who have other abilities that need to be managed, that we have got better and more direct access to our diverse learning team throughout a day on Monday, where students can quietly access their support in a small group environment to help them get through the work because they need that extra support, so we provide it.
And finally, Greg, was there a reason why you chose a Monday to make these changes?
Originally, it's a little bit linked to a lot of our students are committed to Saturday sport, as are our staff. and we thought that the Monday would provide a bit of a gentler start to the week, still getting the work done, but also it was strategically placed on Monday, so there was direct line of sight for activities done on a Monday linked to learning throughout the week.
Very good to talk to you, Greg Miller. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your time.
Now, you've probably heard of the widespread benefits of therapy dogs or even cats or horses, but in a unique approach to mental health care, another animal is making waves.
This northern long-necked turtle may not look that comforting or cuddly, but at a Darwin Children's Clinic, Timmy has taken on the role of therapy turtle, and he's helping hundreds of young people.
Hey Jazz, would you like to see Timmy today? Okay.
Jasmine is living with rheumatoid arthritis.
We've been coming here for, about 3 years with her very complex medical condition that she has. Timmy's great because he's an alternative sort of therapy animal, I guess.
His unusually calming presence makes clinic visits a much less stressful affair.
Then they don't know what's going on, and they don't necessarily understand what, mum and dad or their carers and the doctors are talking about or what's going on with their body. So, does make it a much nicer experience.
They're no longer focusing on their pain, they're no longer focusing on why they're at the doctor, and really makes such a massive difference.
Timmy was abandoned by a local law firm years ago.
When he first arrived, I noticed that he was always at the tank wanting to interact with the kids, and so I started taking him out and taking him outside for walks.
He's been helping children like Jasmine ever since.
Older adults often have rheumatoid arthritis, but when you have it as a child, it's often much more severe. So Jasmine, battles with pain every day, and being able to hold Timmy and cuddle Timmy, as you saw, it can be really helpful for her pain and certainly for her anxiety.
A therapy turtle helping young people feel comfortable in their shells. Roxanne Fitzgerald, ABC News.
Time for sport with Jared Coote. Hi, Jared. Oscar Piastri managed a great win in a Formula One race this morning.
What a performance, Ros. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix, an epic duel with Ferrari's Charles Leclerc, and he got the job done. A superb performance by the young Australian, just the second win of his Formula One Grand Prix career. He moved past Leclerc on lap number 20. It was a superb move by the young Australian from Melbourne. And in fact, this comes the same week that McLaren announced that the team's new orders to ensure that Piastri actually works for his teammate Lando Norris, who was pursuing the Drivers' Championship. Well, Norris finished back in 4th position after starting 15th, so it was a good drive from him. But yeah, Piastri showing he doesn't really need to be any team's second driver. A huge performance from him. George Russell was third after a crash between Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, who were looking for that third spot with only 1 lap to go. Norris has reduced Verstappen's advantage in the overall championship to 59 points, the 7 races remaining. McLaren moving above Red Bull as well in the Constructors' Championship for the first time in a long time. Piastri there probably not loving the champagne as much as he was loving the first place in the race. But good to see a huge win for the young Australian, and he spoke about his victory after the race.
Yeah, I think considering where we started when I joined the team last year, we were literally last, and now we are leading the World Championship. So it's a full credit to the team for the turnaround we've managed to have in my 18 months here. Firstly in terms of improving the car, but helping me improve as well. Results like this definitely weren't possible 12 months ago for myself. So it's a massive team effort, and excited to see what the future holds.
Jared, Tottenham has lost another game in the Premier League.
Yeah, not great result for Spurs and Ange Postecoglou's side. They did lose to tough opposition, though, of course. Arsenal winning 1 goal for Newcastle. But let's hear from Ange Postecoglou speaking about that disappointing loss in the Premier League this morning.
We had some good opportunities, but yeah, we could have had so many more. We just wasted some of our good play with... similar to the other games where we just haven't really had that sort of conviction in the front third to take advantage of whether it's us winning the ball back or getting into that front third and nothing coming of it. So, And, you know, you kind of keep opposition teams in the game when you do that.
What's the latest from the AFL, Joe?
Yeah, of course. So we've got the grand final qualifiers, the prelims this weekend. The Swans taking on Port Adelaide for a spot in the grand final of the SCG. Interestingly, the Swans haven't beaten Port since 2016, but their coach John Longmire wasn't fazed by that at all this morning.
I just think it gets a bit lost a little bit in some of the conversation. They've been a really good footy team for a long, long time. They finished second on the ladder this year. For some reason that gets lost in some of the comments. They're a terrific footy team. And, you know, interesting enough, we've only played them once, I think, in the last 6 times here at the SCG. So for some reason, we haven't played them very much at the SCG. And, you know, last time we played really well against them here.
What's the latest from the Davis Cup?
So Australia already through to the Davis Cup finals by winning their first 2 matches, but this morning they lost to Spain in what is essentially a dead rubber, because Spain also through. They lost 2-1. Jordan Thompson served for the match against Pablo Carreño Busta, but ended up losing in 3 sets. Alexi Poprin then beat Pedro Martinez in straight sets to silence the home crowd there in Valencia. Went down to the doubles. Australia big favourites in this one. Matthew Ebden and Max Purcell, previous Wimbledon champions, but they lost to Marcel Gagnotis, who is the #1 ranked doubles player in the world, and Martinez, who came back on the court after his singles match. Not really well known as a doubles player, but he performed for his team. The Aussies won the first set but lost the second 6-4, the third 6-4. So yeah, not a great end to the tournament for Australia, but they'd already qualified now for the finals in November.
Good stuff. Jared, thank you.
Thank you.
Quick look at the national weather. Brisbane and Sydney sunny, Canberra partly cloudy, Melbourne a shower or 2, Hobart and Adelaide partly cloudy. A sunny day in Perth and a late shower or 2 in Darwin with a top of 34 degrees. And that's ABC News for now. There's more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Ros Childs. Thanks for your company.